Welcome to Go Behind the Ballot, a podcast where two Texas moms go on an educational quest to demystify Texas politics. Join me, Nichole Abshire, and my co-host Claire Campos O'Neill as we deep dive into the most burning issues, hear stories from candidates, and offer hope in these challenging political times. Let's saddle up and go behind the ballot.
Hey everyone, it's Claire and Nichole here from Go Behind the Ballot. We have a really fascinating episode for y'all. We interviewed Dr. Annette Tielle, who is the superintendent for Del Valle ISD. And I feel like we've talked a lot about Del Valle ISD on this podcast because that is the school district I'm connected to and that my son will be starting at this fall. So she was so generous sharing her time with us and speaking about how she got into education, her work as a superintendent, all the many, many hats she wears. She then shared with us about funding for public education and how the state impacts that, a little bit about accountability, and just her passion for education, but specifically reading. And I kept thinking over and over, reading is fundamental. Reading is fundamental. And it's so true. So Nichole, what were some of your quick takeaways?
Well, she really ties a lot of the pieces together of the conversations that we've had up to this point, right? She really touched on so many of the things that we have highlighted in separate episodes, right? She talked about the effect of charter schools on Del Valle ISD and any ISD for that matter. She talked about, like you said, the budget and how finance works. She talked about how teachers and superintendents can advocate for themselves and need to. She talked about accountability. It was just it felt like a great touch point of a lot of the things that we've been talking about and bringing it down to that super practical level and what it looks like for her. And she's so great too. I'm sure this is her teacher background, right? Because it's so extensive. She's so great at making things very clear and very simple. And she knows kind of that starting place and how to get you through each of the pieces that she's talking about so that it's really understandable. So yet another great interview. And I have another person that I am fanning on. I can fangirl on Dr. Tielle all day.
Yes, I loved it. You made me think of something, how we've talked to these folks like Representative Vicki Goodwin, Dr. Audrey Young, who's at SBOE, Candace Hunter, who's running for school board, how they're in these decision maker positions, but how she's like on the ground actually having to implement these decisions and the real impact and challenges she comes up against when they're maybe not, they're just hard to work with because they have unintended consequences.
I was going to bring up that phrase that she used quite a bit, which I really appreciated, that she's just trying to build awareness about those unintended consequences.
Yes. So check this one out and let us know what you think. Here's Dr. Tielle. We're super fans. Well, I guess what would help us to get into this, Dr. Tielle, is if you could tell us a little bit about you and just what got you into education to begin with. What sparked your interest in that field?
Yeah. Well, I was in college. I was not involved in education to begin with. I was in communications. That's where I started. And in the summers, I would work at a child care center. And I fell in love with working with students. I felt that it came very naturally. I felt that I was very creative with them and just had a knack with them. So that's what really made me change my major and go into education. And then from there, my university was able to partner with my child care center, and I was able to intern and actually act as the director in summers. So it was a great jumpstart into education. I became a third grade teacher. And during my first year of teaching, I graduated at 21 years old in May. I was a third grade teacher in August. And during one of my first parent-teacher conferences, I had a mom ask me what I was going to do for her son to teach him how to read. And I didn't know because I didn't learn that in college. So that prompted me to get my master's as a reading specialist because that was when I realized how important literacy is. And from there, I got my master's within 3 years and really embedded that into my instruction, became a reading specialist after about 10 years in the classroom. And I was a reading specialist for every grade level from first grade up until 10th grade. And it was probably the most rewarding thing I've ever done.
Yeah. I'm just curious to back up for a second, because I feel like a lot of folks that we've talked to who are in education, they have families that are in education. Nichole, your parents are educators too, right?
Yes. My father was a teacher. My mom was a teacher, grandmother, aunt.
Yeah. What did your parents do, Dr. Tielle? Do you have any education in your family? Any education?
I do not. I do not actually. I was a first generation college student. So
Wow.
My parents did not go to college. My mom worked in the cafeteria at my high school. My dad began working on a loading dock for Topps Chewing Gum, Bazooka Joe baseball cards. And he worked his way up to be a director in that company. So I watched their work ethic. I think that was the biggest impact that they had on me, was perseverance and work ethic. But no, I did not have any family members prior to me in education.
That's amazing. I also, you know how I love to jump in and share my little tidbits that I just really relate to. And so Dr. Tielle, I think we mentioned right before we started that I started off in special ed, and the really big reason why I moved from special ed to kindergarten was that I kept finding that with my kids, they had a real hole in their ability to read, and I didn't know how to address it. Yes. And so that is why I wanted to move to kindergarten, because I knew that I would learn the basics of how, to teach literacy, and also to do it explicitly, right? And versus kind of that whole language approach. I knew that hadn't worked with the kids that I saw in special ed. So then I really turned my focus to how can I kind of self-educate about how to teach basic reading skills that I thought I would eventually turn back to special ed. I wound up not doing that, but that was my motivation actually for stepping out of special ed and into kindergarten. And then my other little thing is my mom was a reading specialist, and watching her get her master's and how she applied that has so many similarities to what you're talking about. And it was really fun to watch her go through that process. And also, of course, call her up when I needed help. Like, what are the best resources? What should I be reading? So,
well, one of the things that I really focus on as a superintendent is literacy. If you talk to anyone in my district, you'll know that literacy is a major priority here. And one of the things that I've noticed was that our teachers who are special education teachers did not have that type of diagnostic reading training. Neither did our interventionists, for that matter. So we have put together a very robust training program so that both groups can get trained, and including the special education teachers is going to be the first time that we've done that this coming school year. And that's very important for that reason.
Oh, I would have loved that back in the day so much. That speaks right to my heart.
So when it comes to, you're making me think, I don't even know how I would go about teaching a child how to read. When you're developing policy for your teachers, is that coming from the state, or is the district creating that?
It's a combination. So the state creates the TEKS. And they are the standards that every student needs to know by the end of that particular grade level. But what we do as a district is we develop a curriculum. And I am very proud of the way that we develop our curriculum in Del Valle ISD. I actually developed a book, and we use that workbook to write curriculum. And it's not because I wrote the book that I believe in our process. It's because it really is an in-depth process. Every summer, we start with our data. And I believe that this is why our district has made the gains that it has. We look at our data, we look at where the gaps are, and we refine our curriculum to address those gaps. So if there's a particular area that we see, we're going to spiral that throughout the school year for that grade level. And then based on that scope and sequence that we build, in other words, when we look at where the gaps are and we build our curriculum on a timeline, then we create maps for the teachers. And we have instructional strategies in our curriculum, what we do for all students, which we call Tier 1, what we do and what we provide for teachers who have students who are struggling in Tier 2, and then what do we do for students who are far below grade level and receive Tier 3 instruction. Because when you have all of those students in your classroom, you have to differentiate and not all teachers know how to do that. You can't just send them out of the classroom. You have to be able to provide for them in the classroom. And then with that is what kind of adaptations do we make and modifications for our students with special needs, as well as our gifted and talented students. So our curriculum is developed by our teachers, for our teachers, with guidance from our curriculum team. And it does begin with what the state sets as standards, but we highly develop that to be very responsive to our district and our students.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds so amazing.
Yeah, what does that make you think of, Nichole?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, just like light bulbs going off of how amazing that process would have been, I think, when I was teaching. Something that I really loved that you said. So when I was actually teaching special ed was at the moment when inclusion was becoming kind of the standard practice instead of pull out. We were right in that transition. So I had my own classroom and kids came to me, but we were trying to really have inclusion be the model. And if that's not obvious for people who are listening, what that means is that there was a time in special ed when you sent kids out of the classroom to go get instruction from a special ed teacher. But of course, what we found, right, is that really differentiates between kids. There's all sorts of challenges that creates in the environment. And so the model became instead that kids stay as much as possible within their general ed population so that, you know, they're receiving the same services as everyone, and that there's more differentiation that happens within the classroom. Maybe especially a teacher comes in and kind of supplements with that teacher, but that kids as much as possible stay in the classroom. That was a real switch that happened. And so what you're talking about would have been so great because when I was teaching special ed, there was a lot of tension. Nobody kind of knew how to implement this new inclusion model. And even though you can believe in it theoretically, and I definitely did, there was a lot of pushback sometimes from teachers because, and I too didn't really know how to guide or make that happen. So what you're talking about would have really smoothed that process and just made it incredible. So I love what you're doing.
Well, thank you. When I was a teacher, my second year of teaching, our special education director came to me and told me that she wanted me, this was in 1992, she wanted me to implement one of the first inclusion classrooms in third grade. And they were doing it in every grade level, but I was selected as the third grade teacher. And I really loved it. I did receive a lot of training and I understood what that looked like. I planned very closely with my special education partner. I also had a paraprofessional who would come in when she couldn't be available. And I really understood how to differentiate within my classroom. And again, having 14 years of experience, 10 in the classroom and 4 as a reading specialist from first grade to high school, I do understand what teachers are facing. So when they're saying to me, well, you don't know what it feels like in the classroom, I spent as much time as a teacher as I have as an administrator. I've had 30 years in education and half was as a teacher. So I do understand. And I do also understand the training component that we need to provide for teachers. In Del Valle, we started this year, Del Valle University. And we have created a 4-year plan for all of our teachers. And each of our teachers has our core classes that they have to take, which include basic curriculum understanding and instructional strategies. And then we specify for whatever position they're in and what grade level and content they teach. So if you're a first grade teacher who teaches a bilingual dual language classroom, we have a 4-year path for you. If you're a third grade teacher who's self-contained, we have a path for you. If you're a math teacher in 8th grade, we have a path for you. And it's for that reason, because I don't believe that universities necessarily prepare our teachers, nor do alt-cert programs for the challenges that come with public education and education in general.
Mm-hmm.
I was an alt-cert teacher, by the way.
Yes, which is alternative certification, right? That's what that stands for.
That's right. Okay. That's right.
Just for folks who don't know, and I have to remind myself.
Right. Well, and an important thing to point out too, right, is that special ed is a high need area. And so, at least in Dallas, they were really, eager, I guess, to welcome people to their alternative certification program who were willing to teach special ed. Right. So that also is a really interesting challenge, right? Because it's a very demanding job and it requires a lot of knowledge because it's the most litigious part of education, right? So you really have to know what you're doing, understand your paperwork. Like there's just a lot that you're responsible for, teaching being just a little portion, which is another reason why I wanted to move out of special ed, is that I wanted to teach and I felt like I was really weighed down a lot by paperwork and meetings. But I think I guess I have a point. I think I do, right? Which is just that alternative certification, often special ed teachers fall in that category. And it's also one of the most, I would say, kind of rigorous positions. I know they all are, but there's a lot to learn, maybe is that is almost separate from teaching.
That is very true. There are a lot of components to special education, and a lot of it is the legal components.
Yeah, well, we're very excited that Del Valle has this additional training so that if you come into the school and you might not be as prepared as you need to be, y'all have a pathway to train people up so that they do have confidence in the classroom and can be really effective with our students. So we love the work you're doing, Dr. Tielle. And for those who don't know, I am part of Del Valle ISD. So you're my child superintendent, which is super exciting for me.
You are so lucky.
Which we love having you as a part of our district.
Yes, it's a wonderful place. But I think it's a great segue into the role of superintendents. So can you tell us how you went from becoming a teacher and your path to become the superintendent, and then just what superintendents do in Texas and what that role looks like?
Absolutely. So I started my career in Pennsylvania. Ironically, the first district that I taught in was Delaware Valley School District in Pennsylvania. And I was there for 14 years. And when I moved to Texas in 2005, I began in Round Rock. And my position at that time was secondary reading specialist. So I worked with high school students who had difficulty reading. And then from that position, I became the reading coordinator to coordinate the secondary reading program. And my passion for literacy is what propelled me to the superintendency. And what I saw with a lot of our students in high school is they would drop out of school if they couldn't read. And they would get involved in drugs and alcohol. And I'm not saying that happens for every student who obviously can't read, but I did see that. And that broke my heart because I felt like we were failing them, that they did not have a chance if we did not provide them that opportunity to read. And as a high school student, if they don't have us, then who do they have? Mm-hmm. So from that, I wanted to train on reading strategies for secondary specifically at that point. And I got hired as a professional development director in Manor Independent School District. Mm-hmm. And as professional development director, I developed the training program for all teachers from kinder through high school in all content areas. And I had a very a strong niche in that area because of my experience teaching, and was very successful with that. Became very interested in how to help teachers who were new teachers be able to actualize or execute strategies if they didn't have a mentor, or if they didn't have professional development. And that was where I started to really research and study curriculum writing. I went to St. Louis and I studied curriculum writing in St. Louis. I went to Pennsylvania. I studied curriculum writing in Pennsylvania. And then I also studied curriculum writing here in Texas and began to develop a process that was very research-based, which is what I described earlier. And through that, moved up to assistant superintendent in both Comal and Pflugerville ISD, deputy superintendent here in Del Valle ISD, and then superintendent as I am now. And
yeah, I love it. It sounds like you wear a lot of hats. And I like when you talked about going to the classroom, it reminded me of Undercover Boss, how you're at all levels and understanding what's happening. So that, that sounds very necessary. And I love that you do that, because how else do you know what's happening unless you have that personal firsthand experience? And I'm sure it changes year to year what they're going through.
It does. And I'll tell you, during COVID, when we were remote, I would walk into campuses and put my head in the office of registrars and say, so how are things going? How is it tracking attendance? And I found out it wasn't going well. And it was very cumbersome. And some of the stipulations that the state put on us, having the registrars and the campuses actually do that, was extremely difficult. And it wasn't very tight record keeping. I wouldn't have found that out unless I was going in and visiting with them. And we wound up having monthly meetings to solve those problems. So it's important for a superintendent to be visible, to be known, so that you have relationships with staff and they feel safe enough to tell you what's working and what isn't, and that they're willing to sit by you and problem solve, and that they know that they can trust you to be there with them.
Yeah, I appreciate that you're very proactive and forward thinking and have this long-term vision. Because when we don't do those things, you're going to have to solve these problems regardless. So why not solve them in the beginning and save yourself some grief, put in the hard work, but it'll run so much smoother. So as you were speaking about the many hats that you wear, one thing you brought up was finance. So I think if we could transition into finance a little bit, a big part of the state's budget is public education. Tell us what you think taxpayers need to know about the spending that happens in schools that they might not know, and why it is so expensive, but why it is also so necessary to make sure we're investing in public education.
I think the first thing that taxpayers need to understand is that there are two buckets of money. And one is the bucket of money that comes from bond sales, and that's what you call interest in sinking, and that goes towards facilities and transportation, meaning buses, and any type of construction. The reason I say that that's important for taxpayers to understand is sometimes when we pass a bond, the next question is, why can't we use that for teacher salaries? Or why can't we use that for supplies? You can't legally use those bond funds for anything other than what was in the bond package, and specifically for anything related to construction and planning. So I think that's one misconception. And then the biggest, of course, is on the operations side. We do have a state budget, and that does come from taxpayer dollars, but the district does not set that tax rate. That is set by TEA and property values and appraisals. So we are told what the tax rate is from TEA on that side. And what happens on that side is that if this is our cup, and within this cup, this is the amount of finance allocated to Del Valle ISD, we can't fill this cup more than this cup will hold. So if we gather this much money in taxes, the state, with the funding they get, make up the remainder. Or if we get this much money in taxes, the state will make up the remainder. So this cup, ideally, is always full. However, where this becomes problematic is if you receive taxpayer dollars above this, this goes back to the state, and that's what's called recapture that you hear about. What people don't know about recapture is that that money goes back to the state, and that doesn't necessarily get funneled back into education. And right now it's not getting funneled back into education. So when teachers are concerned about we want raises and there's a 6% cost of living increase in Austin, how can you help us? We want to. And I tell our teachers all the time, we want to provide that increase. We know there's a cost of living increase, but we only have this much in our cup. And every year, this is all they give us. So unless the lawmakers start building in that cost of living increase into the allocation set by districts, and start determining what to do with that recapture funding in a way that really gives back to the districts, we're going to be in a difficult situation. In Del Valle ISD, the reason that we were able to give a 7% raise increase, which I'm extremely proud of, was by creative staffing. We had to remove a planning period from our secondary educators and add an early release day on Fridays for that planning time. So that was one of the ways that we were able to offer that. And of course, that's a give and take. But I also think people may not understand why we did that. And the reason why we did that is we don't have additional funding coming from the state. And we had to look out, I had to look out 5 years ahead to make sure we could sustain that 7% raise. And we wouldn't have been able to sustain it without this creative planning And I don't want 3 years from now to say to you on this podcast, well, we had to lay off 50 teachers because we gave a 7% increase and now we can't sustain it.
So if we want to change the model, that has to happen at the state level.
That's correct. That has to, and this is the time for that to happen because they are going into legislative season, and we really need to advocate for that cost of living increase and a different type of funding. We have what's called average daily attendance. You'll hear superintendents talk about ADA, that's average daily attendance. So districts are to pick a period in the day when they take attendance. And based on that attendance, districts receive the funding for their students. So right now we're projected to have 11,500 students. So if this cup is funded for 11,500 students, you would expect us to get all of that funding. Well, for every student who is absent, we will get less and less and less funding. So we aren't guaranteed the full amount. We're only guaranteed the full amount if 100% of the students attend 100% of the time. Wow. So I think that's another misconception. You'll hear people say, districts only care about the money. They want kids to come to school because of the money. Well, we build our budget on that money and on that funding. Mm-hmm. So when we don't have attendance, that impacts the way that we're able to fund our schools. So what's unfortunate is with COVID, we had students who missed a lot of time. They were ill. They had family members who were ill. Even during flu season, you have some students, especially on the east side, who are asthmatic. We have more health issues on our side because there's a dearth of healthcare. So our students, unfortunately, miss more school, and that is a direct correlation to not having the healthcare services. Thankfully, more are coming, but that is a direct correlation to funding then that we receive. So the district is being penalized for parents taking care of their students and keeping them home when they're ill, and that is a flaw in the formula structure of funding.
Well, and Claire, do you remember when we spoke to Representative Goodwin? She wants this to change. I know that she is really invested in building in a cost of living increase that is just a part of the legislation, so that it doesn't have to be debated every session. That's just something that is automatically included in the budget. I think that would help a little, right? It sounds like this is a multiple front issue, but at least, there would be that little bit of relief.
And the funding that the state is getting back from recapture, if that was put back into the schools for cost of living increases, it isn't being put back into the schools.
That's another thing she pointed out that she wants to see change.
Yes, and that would help the structure of funding for Texas schools. There is an inequity, and that's where the inequity is coming from.
Yeah, this makes me think of a lot of things, but I'll take this route. So when you're talking about student enrollment and attendance, it makes me think of our conversation we had with Patty Everett about charter schools. And she was talking about how when charter schools open in neighborhoods, they're pulling kids from different schools, and you're having a lot of stranded costs in the local ISDs. So can you talk to us about the impact charter schools are having on districts around Texas and the way that is impacting the budgets that are there?
Yes, and before I go into that specifically, I do want to talk about some of the misconceptions about charter schools. So a lot of times charter schools will very aggressively market to our families. They will do an open records request for the students in our district, send flyers or call the families directly and tell them all that they are offering in a charter school. What they don't tell them is if there's a behavioral problem, the students no longer attend the charter school, they're not allowed to continue, they come back to public school. Students in special education where they can't support their needs come back to public school. Students who are second language learners, when they don't have that bilingual education, they come back to public schools. So public schools do not have that autonomy to say, we're selecting these students, but we're not going to allow these students in. So that's one misconception. The other is we offer music, art, all the fine arts is in high school, like dance and band, and we're implementing orchestra. So it's a very well-rounded education in public schools that charter schools just do not have the capacity to offer, as well as the very robust CTE program. Sometime I'd love to come back and talk about our CTE program. But our elementary
Dr.
school...
Tielle, will you just tell us what CTE stands for?
Sure. Career and technical education.
Okay, great.
Yes, career and technical education. And we have an actual building that is a completely hands-on lab for everything from welding, construction, and healthcare to auto mechanics and graphic design. So there are things that we can offer in a public school and do offer that charter schools do not. Our elementary school, Smith Elementary School, which has 5 charter schools around it, outperformed all 5. They are an A campus in a district, Del Valle ISD, which is a B district. We're outperforming charter schools. So the way that charter schools negatively impact districts is what I just said. We plan our budget based on enrollment, and we base our enrollment on projections. We have a demographer study the area, and all school districts do this. We have demographers study our area and study projected growth. This is how we determine when to go out for a bond, how much to set the bond for, which schools we need to build, where the growth is so that we can build schools in the right areas. This is how we build our budget. You get a certain amount of funding for every student that comes, like I just explained. When we build our budget for 11,500 students, but a charter school markets to 500 of them, well, now every student, the state provides funding of $6,100, actually $6,150 per student. So you take that funding away from the district, whatever 6,100 is times 500, then that funding will follow the students and not filter into the school district. So one, we're not going to be able to maintain our budget because right off the bat, we're not getting as much funding. 2, we're building campuses for students who will no longer be attending those campuses. And 3, the parents have misinformation about what the charters will be providing, and they really won't provide all that they promise. All that glitters is not gold, right? And I've had teachers and parents who have been in charter schools return to us this year and say, what Del Valle offers is above and beyond anything they've had in charter schools, and their kids weren't happy. But you wouldn't know that unless you actually compared apples to apples.
Yeah, something that Patty was telling us was some of these schools don't have nurses or libraries, and these things you would assume would be there because that's what local ISDs have, but you don't think to ask that because it's the best comparison I can think of is like if I go to a restaurant and I'm like, where's the bathroom? And they're like, there's no bathroom. I'm like, what? Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll tell you,
there.
several weeks ago, one of my board members and 2 of my curriculum team members testified in front of the State Board of Education because there were 2 charter schools that were coming to Del Valle. And they testified on behalf of Del Valle ISD, and the State Board of Education voted against those 2 charter schools from coming based on their compelling testimony. They had a superintendent who had never been a teacher and was not familiar with education. The State Board of Education recognized that not having that level of expertise, like I just shared with you, I can't imagine not having my background trying to perform this job. It's hard enough when you have the background, let alone not having that background. And making sure that you understand deeply what your students need. I think that speaks volumes. I have to give the State Board of Education a lot of credit. And I think that exemplifies that when the community is informed truly about charter schools versus public schools, they make the right choice. There's just misinformation out there.
Mm-hmm. That's such a great point. Because another thing that came up in that conversation we had with Patty Everett was the public relations component that you touched on, right? The all that glitters is not gold metaphor is so perfect because we were talking about the challenges that local ISDs face, which is if you had a huge PR budget, can you imagine the blowback you would get for that, right? But everybody just assumes that charter schools are offering those same set of what we might consider sort of basic services that your local ISD provides. So you don't think to ask the charter school those specific questions.
Yes.
And so then, here you wind up in this place that you think is going to be the most amazing and transformative, only to learn all the things that you didn't know until you were a part of it. But if you've got a huge PR budget, you just sort of sweep that under the rug. Nobody needs to know those things.
That's right. And they talk a lot about 100% of their students being accepted into college. Well, that's because they have all of their students apply to ACC. So when they all get accepted to ACC, you can say 100% of their students are accepted into college. In Del Valle ISD, I would rather determine that I have 20 students who are in our career technical education program, in our auto tech program. They received a certification as an auto technician, and they're getting hired, which they did this year by BMW of Austin, by the city of Austin. So right out of high school, they're going into the workforce. That's more important to me than them getting accepted into a 2-year college that they're not going to go to.
I got the chills when you said that.
It's true. My students who do get accepted, I want them to go and I want them to get a great experience. But just because they're not going to a university, that doesn't mean that they're not entering a very valuable career.
Well, especially when we know the workforce challenges right now. I mean, come on. Right. We have got to really change that mindset of what is valued and valuable as a society. And so absolutely, we've got to emphasize exactly what you're talking about, creating a workforce that is actually what we need.
Yeah. Well, I have one more question regarding funding. So I have a son who's going to be starting preschool. Very excited about that. Talk to us about preschool funding. Is that fully funded by the state?
Great question.
How does that work?
That's a great question, because that's another misconception of how districts are funded. Students who attend a school district, again, as I said, districts receive $6,150 per child. Well, for a pre-kindergarten student, they receive half of that funding. So half ADA is what we call it. And that's because pre-K used to be a half-day program. So the state would fund us for a half-day program. Well, when the state required, which I 100% supported and I testified for it, when the state mandated the full-day pre-K, they didn't increase that funding allotment. So the districts had to make up that other half of funding, which it's worth it, but eventually you can't get blood from a stone. So where are we going to get the additional funding? And we were subsidizing that. However, pre-K is only open to students who qualify. Students who qualify means that they're either on free and reduced lunch, they are a second language learner. English is not their first language. Their parents are active military. They're in foster care, have been in foster care, or they're homeless. Now, what I have to think, and I want to really give a shout out to the city of Austin and Travis County, they have partnered with Del Valle to pay for all students in Del Valle ISD to attend full day pre-K. So it doesn't matter if you qualify or you don't qualify. I was just speaking to a gentleman this morning who was surprised to find out that his child did not need to qualify. And next year, when she turns 4, she can come to Del Valle ISD, which is something else that we offer in our district, that is in partnership with the city and the county.
Mm-hmm. I'm so thankful that as a parent, my son, I have 2 kids in daycare, and we spend over $2,000 for the both of them. And I mean, we have the money, we can pay it, but if that was taken out, if we didn't have to allocate that for our budget, we could put our money towards other things.
Right.
And we're doing all right. I mean, I just think about families that are really struggling. And I mean, honestly, I think we should have more subsidies for earlier than just, 4-year-olds. But it's such a blessing that the city of Austin and Travis County prioritize that, because it has such a great, I think, upward spiral for families. So I hope that we continue prioritizing this. And the state provides money too down the road. That would be great.
The state really does need to prioritize that, because we know that when students enter pre-K, when they go to 3rd grade and we test students who attended pre-K and compare them to their same age peers, they outperform their same age peers who did not attend pre-K. They're getting all of those early literacy skills, which I am so passionate about. And that's helping them be able to create the foundation that they need. A statistic that people don't know is that if kids are not reading on grade level by the end of 3rd grade, there's a 25% chance they'll be a non-reader for life. So it's critical that by the end of first grade, we have kids reading on grade level. If they're not reading on grade level by the end of third grade, there's a 50% chance they'll be a non-reader. And if they're not reading on grade level by fifth grade, there's a 75% chance they'll be a non-reader for life. So my passion for literacy is well-founded in research, and that is really what my concern is.
I just keep thinking reading is fundamental for everything.
It is.
And such a wise investment. I mean, $3,000 extra and think of how we'll save society and societally down the road by just making that early investment. I'm convinced.
Well, yeah, right.
When I'm in
we
charge.
We can all testify together. We can all testify together this legislative session.
We're the choir that doesn't need to be preached to, but we certainly send that out to others, right? Totally converted, total believers, 100%. But I remember too, another conversation, I'm making so many connections, right? When Dr. Young talked about the bus issue, I think in her district, right? Which was a requirement by the state that buses had to have seatbelts, but they didn't fund it, right? So for some districts, the burden of that was unbearable, and they adjusted the legislation just a bit to kind of grandfather in some things. But anyway, I guess the point I'm making is I find it really strange, and I would not have known this without these conversations, that the state can mandate things and not fund them and then just sort of say,
there are many unfunded mandates. And the interesting piece is that with these unfunded mandates, it's not that we don't believe in these mandates. I believe in full day pre-K wholeheartedly, but I also believe that it should be funded. And if you're going to mandate it, that tells me you believe in it. Why wouldn't it be funded? And then the other piece is we offer dual language in our pre-K program, and that is helping us become a global society. We have a mission and a vision in our district that our students will be biliterate, both Spanish speakers and English speakers. We want our Spanish speaking students to retain their home language. We don't want them to be immersed in English so they lose that home language. And we want our English speaking students to be exposed to the culture and language of the Spanish culture, because it's important for them as they grow up to be able to be bilingual and then also to understand the culture of the state they live in.
I love that so much. My son's going to be in the dual language program, but I think of these parents who say, oh, my kids aren't challenged. I'm like, put them in dual language. I can't imagine it will be more challenging, but also so enriching for them and beneficial. And the way your brain, it's so malleable and such a great opportunity to start early. I wish I had had that as a child, because my mother was a native Spanish speaker. She spoke Spanish in the home and learned English in school. And she tried to teach me when I was young, but we were living in Georgia. We weren't around a Mexican community. And I was just like, Mom, I don't understand what you're saying. I was so dismissive. But if I had been in a different culture where Spanish was normalized and heard, I'm sad I missed it, but I'm so glad I can give that to my son now.
And we want to instill that pride in our students, the pride of their culture, a pride of their language, and they deserve to be proud. And it's a shame that you were in an environment where you couldn't be proud of that, because that is something to be proud of. I have a lot of students who sometimes will say, Miss, I'm not smart. I can't read in English, or I have a hard time reading and speaking in English. And I'll say to them, you speak 2 languages. Don't say that you're not smart. You're smarter than anyone else around you. You have that ability. And it's also about helping our kids learn to believe in themselves. So I really believe that this is a priority that we need to have for our students.
Nichole, do you have that?
Just like I could bathe in all of this. It just really warms my heart. It's just so needed, right? It just is so needed. So no, I don't have any.
Absolutely.
So good.
I love it. I'm also hoping as Cole, starts in this dual language program that it'll help. I do my Duolingo. I've been taking Spanish classes, but I'm excited to do this alongside with him, and it'll be great. We can speak with each other, and hopefully it'll help my brain get back in gear.
Well, it'll be good for Connor to hear, right? You're younger. Yeah. He'll just
absolutely
hear that.
Yes.
And have a base.
Yay. So it's going to help all of us. So I think this would be a good place talking about reading and English as a second language to talk about testing and accountability. So right now, well, maybe you can tell us. I'll preface it a little bit, but the way that we keep schools accountable in Texas is through the STAR test primarily and our A through F rating system. Can you talk to us a little bit about the accountability system we currently have in place?
Yes, so the accountability system that we currently have in place is based on 3 domains. And the first domain is straight academic performance. The second domain is based on growth. And then the third domain is based on how many students in each of your student populations meet domain 1 and domain 2. And this is interesting because in that third domain, in districts like Del Valle, we have a very high percentage of students in those student populations, from all ethnicities to second language learners and even special education. And a district is rated by how well each of those student populations perform in each of the content areas by grade level. Now, when you look at a district that doesn't have that type of diversity and they're getting rated on domain 3, sometimes they don't have enough in the student population for that domain to even count. And if you underperform or fail in that domain, if you collectively take the accumulation and the cumulative score of domains 1, 2, and 3, and the district passes, if you fail that last domain, you still will fail, even if collectively your composite score is meeting the standard. So I think that's something that people don't know. And also in domain 1, students who meet masters receive 3 points. Students who reach the meets level, which is in fact on grade level, receive 2 points. And students who are approaching grade level, which is passing, receive 1 point. And I think what's interesting about that is I believe all students should be at the meets and masters level, but there also is a philosophical debate here. Because if you have a campus of 100 students and 100 of them pass and you have 100 points, well, then you're going to be a D because you didn't get enough points to be an A or a B. If you're a campus and half of your students reach masters, that's 3 times 50 or 150, and half of your students fail and get 0, then you're still going to have 150 points and you could be a high C or a B. So the priority isn't on all students, it's on the students in meets and masters. And again, I believe that all students should have high expectations, and I believe that all students should hit that meets and masters level. But it also is interesting that when you have a district where, like ours, we have a lot of mobility, we can't control where students are moving in and out of, we do have students of poverty. Our goal is we want to have them pass as well as move to the master's level. But if they're below the approaches level, the first thing we have to do is get them to approaches before we could get them to meets and masters. And they shouldn't be penalized for that. If they pass, I understand that we want to get them to masters, but again, there is a discrepancy for having a whole entire campus pass versus half of the campus pass and the other half fail, because the first half is achieving that high level, meaning if the other half is of poverty, then the campus could still outperform other campuses.
With this podcast, we're hoping to obviously connect with a lot of listeners, but also give them tools so that if they want to go beyond just listening and take action, that we can suggest things that they do, like testify, write letters, written testimony, and share their experience. And we're hopeful that our representatives do receive that and perhaps change their minds or it has an impact on policy.
And any parent groups that you know of that would be willing to hear myself speak or some of my colleagues, I think that that's always important too, to help inform the community, because as you shared today, there's a lot of misinformation, and it's important to get the facts out to the community.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nichole, should we move to our last fun little section?
Yes, we didn't prepare you, but we'll do it.
Yes. So to wrap up, what we like to do is something called our attention mentions, where you mention something that has your attention this week over the last couple of days, whether it's like a show or an article you read, a podcast, maybe a experience. So yeah, we like to do that to wrap up. Nichole, myself.
I think one of the most exciting things that I've done in the first few days is take our teachers from Smith Elementary School on a walkthrough of their brand new campus. And the ribbon cutting is this Friday at 9 a.m. And we walked together last Thursday. We walked in together. It was their first time seeing the campus. We walked in with the principal and all the teachers, and they got to see the brand new building for the first time. They got to go to their classrooms. There were murals that were painted by parents in the old building that we were able to replicate and surprise the teachers and have those restored on the library walls. The campus is just a beautiful campus. There's a lot of tactile opportunities for the kids, even when they're walking down the hall. And I think it is just something that was extremely exciting for me to see. And I always tell our teachers that everything that we do for our kids matters. The way we dress, the way we show up, letting the kids see that we value them, the facilities that we have. If the facilities aren't painted or run down, the kids walk in feeling like they don't matter. When you provide them a brand new building, they walk in and they realize that they're valued. Even at two of our older campuses, Beatty Elementary School and Hillcrest Elementary School. Last year, we renovated the facade of Beatty Elementary, and our teachers and students were just excited. They walk in, they feel valued. This year, we did the same thing for Hillcrest because it's important to me as a superintendent that every campus students feel valued when they walk in, whether it's a brand new campus or a campus that's been here for 50 years. So that was something that was super exciting. And the first day of school is also on August 9th, and I'm excited to welcome all of our kids back.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the environment you in absolutely affects your performance. And I think about form over function, but how the form matters for how well you're going to function.
It does. It does.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so excited. I'm going to go to the groundbreaking. So I can't wait to check that out too.
Yeah. Well, if you can make it too, you need to join us.
I think I need to. Yeah. It's just so sweet. I love it.
So the thing I will mention, and Nichole might laugh, is an app. If you are a podcast listener like myself,
I know what you're going to say.
She's
obsessed.
I'm obsessed with Stitcher, the Stitcher app. That is the best way to listen to podcasts. Whenever we have podcast friends that say, I have a podcast, and they're not on Stitcher, I'm like, you're dead to me. You have to be on Stitcher because it's just such a great, easy, it's so functional. I love the way that it's laid out. It's designed for podcast listeners, like I listen to like 2 hours of podcasts a day. I listen to so much. So Stitcher, I love you. Maybe sponsor us one day. You're the best.
And she's not kidding when she says that's always her first question to people. Are you on Stitcher?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be on all the channels like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, but Stitcher is my preferred.
It's so funny. Your little obsession. Okay. What is catching my attention right now? Oh my goodness. I did not come prepared. That was not smart of me. Well, I'll tell you what, actually, they have uploaded a lot of Lifetime movies to YouTube. And so it is really interesting to explore some of the titles that they have. So I started watching Stalked at 17, which I can't, the quality is fun to watch. I'll say that. So I guess that's what's catching my attention. The Lifetime movies that are now available on YouTube. If you just want a really melodramatic thing to watch, it will satisfy that itch. So
yeah, it sounds good to have on in the background. You're folding laundry or doing whatever.
Yes. You can always count on a dramatic moment. They are full of that. So, it's not like my real life, and maybe that's why I enjoy it, is that I just watch it on a screen.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Tielle, for your time. We really appreciate it and learning more about superintendents do. And we're so thankful for all of your hard work as a superintendent because it's a very important role and it's not easy. And we're so thankful that you are committed
Oh my
to
gosh.
Del Valle.
So it gives me so much faith in where we are in public education to know that people like you are serving in this role. It's incredible.
Well, thank you. I was very honored to be part of this morning. So thank you for the time and for allowing me to be on this morning.
Thank you, everybody, for joining me, Nichole Abshire, and my co-host, Claire Campos O'Neill, on Go Behind the Ballot. Hopefully, we've demystified some little portion of Texas politics, and we hope that you'll do more with us. Check out our website at www.gobehindtheballot.com, where you'll find links to all of our social media, and you will find our community. Let's join together and do more. We hope you'll let us know what is working, and we hope you'll join us next week. Thanks, everybody, and have a good one.